Rome believed itself eternal. Its leaders spoke of destiny, of order imposed upon chaos, of civilization spreading inevitably from the Mediterranean to the edge of the known world. Rome believed rebellion was temporary. Resistance was expected. But defeat, true defeat, was unthinkable. And yet, in the year 60 AD, Rome came closer to losing Britain than it ever publicly admitted. Not to another empire, not to a rival king, but to a woman driven not by ambition, but by fury. Her name was Boudicca. She did not command legions trained from childhood. She did not possess Rome's discipline, roads, or logistics. What she commanded was something far more dangerous: the collective rage of a people who had nothing left to lose. This is not simply the story of a rebellion. It is the story of what happens when imperial order collides with human vengeance, when empire meets fury. When Roman soldiers first set foot in Britain in 43 AD, they did not believe they were entering a land capable of truly threatening the empire. To Rome, Britain was distant and unfamiliar, a cold, forested island at the very edge of the known world. It lacked the stone cities, vineyards, and long-established roads of the Mediterranean. Its people were divided into tribes, bound by loyalty and tradition rather than written law. To many Romans, Britain was less a prize of wealth and more a test of reach. And reach mattered. To conquer Britain was to prove that Rome's authority extended even to the margins of the world, that no land lay beyond imperial order. The invasion itself was swift. Roman legions crossed the Channel, subdued resisting tribes, and established military dominance over much of southeastern Britain. But conquest was only the first step. Rome had learned through hard experience that holding territory was far more difficult than taking it. Britain was expensive to occupy directly. Its terrain favored ambush. Its tribes were mobile, independent, and accustomed to warfare. Constant military rule would drain men and resources. So Rome relied on a strategy it had used across its empire: client kingdoms. Local rulers were allowed to remain in power, governing their own people under Roman supervision. They collected tribute, maintained order, and acknowledged Roman supremacy. In return, Rome offered protection and the illusion of autonomy. For Rome, this system was efficient. For local rulers, it was dangerous, because client kings ruled only as long as Rome found them useful. One such ruler was Prasutagus, king of the Iceni tribe in eastern Britain. The Iceni were not weak. They were wealthy, organized, and proud, with their own traditions, coinage, and warrior culture. Prasutagus ruled them as a native king, not a Roman official, one who had chosen cooperation over destruction. For years, the arrangement appeared to work. The Iceni paid tribute. Rome largely avoided interference. A tense but profitable peace held. But peace under empire was conditional. Roman officials stationed in Britain viewed client kingdoms as temporary arrangements. Beneath the surface, annexation was always expected. Britain was not meant to remain semi-independent forever. Prasutagus understood this. As he aged, he faced a question no client king could escape. What would happen after his death? If Rome moved to absorb his kingdom, his family would lose everything. So Prasutagus attempted a compromise, rooted in Roman custom. In his will, he left his kingdom jointly to his daughters and the Roman emperor, hoping this gesture of loyalty would preserve Iceni autonomy. It was a gamble, and it failed. When Prasutagus died around 60 AD, Rome acted swiftly and without restraint. Roman officials seized Iceni lands, treating them not as the property of a client kingdom, but as spoils of conquest. Noble families were stripped of wealth, debts were enforced. Roman creditors moved in, plunging communities into desperation. The client system depended on restraint. When Rome abandoned it, it exposed the reality beneath imperial rule, that peace existed only at Rome's convenience. Rome believed Britain was pacified, but beneath the surface, anger was spreading, and the system that had brought Rome to the edge of the world was about to collapse under its own arrogance. Then came the act that changed everything. Boudicca, Prasutagus's widow, was publicly flogged before her people. Her daughters were raped. This was not a breakdown of discipline, but a deliberate assertion of dominance, Rome's way of demonstrating that local authority no longer mattered. To Roman officials, this was punishment meant to enforce order. To the Iceni, it was humiliation and betrayal. By violating a queen so openly, Rome destroyed the last remaining legitimacy of its rule. The message was unmistakable. No promise would be honoured, no status respected. For Boudicca, this moment marked a clear divide. There would be no appeals to Rome, no negotiations, no restraint. What had been a political arrangement became a personal reckoning, and the conditions for rebellion were finally complete. Roman writers struggled to describe Boudicca without revealing their unease. They portrayed her as tall and imposing, with a commanding presence and a voice capable of stirring crowds. Her appearance was described not to flatter, but to emphasize that she was unlike the women Rome expected to confront. Yet even through hostile accounts, one fact is clear. Boudicca was a figure of authority long before rebellion began. In Celtic Britain, leadership did not exclude women. Queens could rule in their own right, command warriors, and speak publicly before assemblies. Power was tied not to gender, but to lineage, reputation, and the ability to lead. Boudicca was not an exception to this system. She was a product of it. As the wife of Prasutagus, she had already exercised influence within the Iceni kingdom. She understood tribal politics, alliances, and the expectations of leadership. Her authority was recognized by her people, even if Rome refused to acknowledge it. This distinction mattered. When Rome punished Boudicca publicly, it was not merely an insult to a widow. It was an attack on a legitimate ruler. In a society where honor defined power, such humiliation demanded response. Boudicca did not present herself as a victim seeking sympathy. Instead, she reframed her suffering as evidence of Roman injustice. Her punishment became a symbol, proof that Roman rule was based not on law or cooperation, but on domination. To the Iceni and neighbouring tribes, her story confirmed their worst fears. If a queen could be treated this way, no one was safe. In that realization, Boudicca's identity changed. She was no longer simply the widow of a client king. She became the embodiment of resistance and a rallying figure for those who had endured Roman control in silence. Boudicca did not declare rebellion overnight. What followed the destruction of the Iceni client kingdom was a deliberate and careful movement across eastern Britain. She travelled from tribe to tribe, speaking not as a supplicant, but as a queen wronged by Roman betrayal. Her message was direct and easily understood. She framed Roman rule not as inevitable, but as a temporary occupation sustained only by fear. In doing so, she transformed private resentment into collective purpose. The response was immediate. The Trinovantes, long hostile to Roman dominance, were among the first to join her. Other tribes followed, drawn not by ideology, but by shared grievance. Entire communities mobilized. Warriors, farmers, and families gathered together, united by the belief that Rome could be challenged. Timing played a decisive role. In 60 AD, the Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was campaigning far to the west, attacking the Druids on the island of Mona. This left Roman forces in eastern Britain thinly spread and dangerously complacent. Garrisons were small, reinforcements were distant. Boudicca recognized the opportunity. What formed was not a professional army, but a mass uprising, tens of thousands strong. Discipline was uneven, but morale was overwhelming. The rebellion carried momentum, fueled by anger and the belief that Roman authority could be destroyed if struck quickly and decisively. This was not preparation for negotiation. Boudicca's movement was aimed at symbols of Roman power, not compromise. Cities, colonies, and monuments would be targeted not to be captured, but erased. Rome still believed Britain was pacified. But beneath that confidence, the rebellion was already moving, and the spark had become a fire Rome could no longer contain. The first target of Boudicca's rebellion was Camulodunum, a Roman colony built on confiscated tribal land. To Rome, it was a symbol of success, a settlement for retired veterans, a centre of Roman culture, and proof that Britain was being transformed into a loyal province. To the surrounding tribes, it represented dispossession and humiliation. The city stood as a reminder of what had been taken. Camulodunum had one fatal weakness. It was undefended. There were no walls, no serious fortifications, and only a small military presence. Roman officials had dismissed repeated warnings of unrest, convinced that rebellion on such a scale was impossible. When news of Boudicca's approach reached the city, panic spread quickly. Appeals for reinforcements were sent. Only a small detachment arrived, and it was nowhere near enough. Boudicca's forces surrounded the colony and attacked with overwhelming numbers. Resistance collapsed almost immediately. The population fled or was slaughtered as the city was overrun. The rebellion did not distinguish between soldiers and civilians. Camulodunum was not being conquered. It was being destroyed. The Temple of Claudius became the final refuge. Defenders barricaded themselves inside, believing the massive stone structure could withstand attack. For 2 days they held out as the city burned around them. It did not save them. When the temple fell, Camulodunum ceased to exist as a Roman city. Archaeology confirms the devastation. Thick layers of ash, scorched earth, and collapsed buildings mark a sudden and total destruction. Rome's authority in Britain had been reduced to ruins. The rebellion was no longer theoretical. It was real, it was violent, and it was moving fast. News of Camulodunum's destruction reached the Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, too late to prevent it. Suetonius was campaigning far to the west when the rebellion erupted, and the speed of Boudicca's advance caught Rome off guard. He gathered what forces he could and marched east, racing against a rebellion that was growing faster than Roman communications could track. When Suetonius reached Londinium, he faced a grim reality. The city was prosperous, strategically located, and symbolically important, but it was not defensible. Roman troops were too few, and the surrounding countryside was already in revolt. To remain would mean annihilation. Suetonius made a decision that defined the rebellion. He abandoned the city. Roman officials, soldiers, and civilians who could flee were ordered to leave. Those who remained, either by choice or circumstance, were left behind. Londinium was sacrificed to preserve the army. Boudicca's forces arrived soon after. The city was sacked and burned. Buildings collapsed, streets filled with smoke, and the Roman presence was erased in a matter of hours. There was no attempt at occupation. Londinium was destroyed to make a statement. The rebellion did not stop there. The next target was Verulamium, another Roman settlement associated with Roman authority and wealth. Like Londinium, it fell quickly. Like Camulodunum, it was burned to the ground. In a matter of weeks, 3 major Roman centres had been erased. Roman sources later claimed that 70,000 to 80,000 people were killed during the rebellion's advance. Whether exaggerated or not, the scale of destruction was undeniable. For the first time since the conquest of Britain, Rome feared it might lose the province entirely. By the middle of 60 AD, Boudicca's rebellion had achieved what few thought possible. 3 Roman cities lay in ruins. The eastern province was in chaos. Roman authority had collapsed almost entirely outside a handful of military positions. The rebellion's strength came from fury. It moved faster than Roman planning, struck without hesitation, and targeted symbols of power rather than strategic strongpoints. Roman law, infrastructure, and permanence were erased in days. But fury, for all its force, carried limits. Boudicca's army was vast but uneven. It lacked centralized command, standardized equipment, and consistent discipline. Its strength came from momentum and shared anger, not long-term coordination. As the rebellion grew, so did its logistical strain. Food became harder to secure. Weapons varied widely. Coordination between tribes weakened as distances increased. Victory had come quickly, but sustaining it was far more difficult. At the same time, Rome was adapting. Suetonius understood that chasing Boudicca across Britain would bleed his forces dry. Instead, he allowed the rebellion to exhaust itself, while he concentrated what remained of Rome's professional soldiers. This was the fundamental difference between the two sides. Boudicca's power came from emotion and mass participation. Rome's power came from discipline and endurance. As fury burned brightly across Britain, Roman commanders prepared for a confrontation that would not depend on numbers, but on control. The rebellion still believed Rome could be destroyed. Rome believed the rebellion could be contained. Both sides were correct, briefly. The outcome would depend not on who felt more strongly, but on who could impose order when chaos reached its peak. And that moment was approaching fast. By late 60 AD, Governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus understood that the rebellion could not be crushed through scattered responses or city defences. Roman authority in Britain had fractured, but the core of Roman power, the legions, remained intact. Suetonius abandoned the idea of protecting settlements. Instead, he focused on preserving what Rome did best: discipline. He gathered every available professional soldier, legionaries, auxiliaries, and cavalry, until he had a force of roughly 10,000 men. This was far fewer than Boudicca's army, but it was cohesive, experienced, and under unified command. Most importantly, Suetonius chose where the battle would be fought. He positioned his forces along Watling Street, selecting terrain that neutralized numerical disadvantage. A narrow approach restricted movement. Forests secured his flanks. The location ensured that Boudicca's larger force could not surround or overwhelm the Romans. This was deliberate. Roman warfare was not about emotional momentum. It was about control, of space, timing, and formation. Suetonius intended to force the rebellion into a confrontation where discipline would matter more than numbers. Meanwhile, Boudicca's army continued to grow. Confident after repeated victories, her forces advanced, expecting another city to fall. Wagons carrying families followed behind, forming an improvised encampment. The rebellion moved forward, believing Rome would retreat again. The decisive battle came in 60 AD, somewhere along Watling Street, though the exact location has been lost to time. What mattered was not where it was fought, but how. Boudicca's army arrived first, confident and overwhelming in number. Tens of thousands stood ready, warriors drawn from multiple tribes, united by momentum and expectation. They had destroyed cities. They had driven Rome from the east. Many believed victory was inevitable. Behind them stood wagons carrying families and supplies, arranged to watch what they assumed would be another triumph. Across the narrow approach, Suetonius waited. His force was small by comparison, around 10,000 Roman soldiers, but positioned precisely. When Boudicca's forces charged, the Romans did not break. They held formation. Roman pila were hurled into the packed mass, cutting down the front ranks and disrupting the advance. Then the legions moved forward together, shields locked, advancing step by measured step. What followed was not a fluid battle, but a compression. Boudicca's warriors pressed forward with fury, but had nowhere to maneuver. Their numbers became a liability. As the Roman line advanced, the rebels were forced back toward their own wagons. Retreat became impossible. The battle collapsed into slaughter. Roman sources later claimed 80,000 Britons were killed, compared to minimal Roman losses. The exact figures are uncertain, but the outcome is not. The rebellion was broken. Boudicca fled the battlefield, and soon after she vanished from history, whether by poison, illness, or silence imposed by Rome itself. Empire had survived fury, but only just. The defeat of Boudicca's army did not bring immediate peace to Britain. In the aftermath of the decisive battle in 60 AD, the countryside remained unstable. Pockets of resistance lingered, and Roman authority existed largely where soldiers were physically present. Victory had ended the rebellion, but it had not erased the damage. Roman officials reacted with severity. Punitive expeditions moved through rebellious regions, destroying crops, seizing livestock, and executing suspected participants. The goal was not conquest, but deterrence, to ensure no future uprising could gain momentum so quickly again. Yet even within Rome there was concern. The scale of the rebellion and the devastation it caused forced a reassessment of policy. Excessive brutality, many realized, had helped create the revolt in the first place. If Roman rule continued to rely on humiliation and exploitation, Britain would remain permanently unstable. Imperial authorities intervened. Suetonius Paulinus was eventually recalled, not for losing, but for ruling too harshly after victory. A new governor was appointed, with a mandate to restore order through restraint rather than fear. Rome adjusted its approach. Taxation was moderated. Land seizures slowed. Local elites were treated with greater caution. Romanization continued, but gradually. Britain would remain part of the Roman world for nearly 4 centuries, but the lesson of 60 AD lingered. Rome had survived the rebellion, but only narrowly, and only after learning how close it had come to losing the province entirely. Rome survived Boudicca, but it did not escape her. For a brief moment in 60 AD, the greatest empire in the world was forced to confront its own limits, not by another empire, but by the fury of one woman. Boudicca lost the war. Her rebellion was crushed, her army destroyed, and her name reduced, by Roman writers, to a cautionary tale. Yet history remembers something Rome could not erase: that power exercised without restraint creates enemies faster than it creates obedience. Boudicca became more than a defeated queen. She became a symbol of resistance, of injustice, and of the moment when empire learned that fury, once unleashed, can create devastating consequences. Rome adapted, Britain endured, and the lesson echoed far beyond the island. Every empire that followed would face the same question: how much can power take before resistance becomes inevitable? Every empire stands on decisions, mistakes, and moments that could have gone another way. Sometimes the world changes quietly, and sometimes it nearly changes forever. If you want to keep exploring those moments, one story at a time, consider subscribing, and don't forget to ring the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks for watching, and until next time, keep asking questions, keep looking back, and never stop following the footprints through the past.